Welcome to another Platinum Great Word episode of the It's a Mimic podcast, where we're sitting down with one of our top tier Patreon subscribers, Robert. Platinum Great Worm tier patrons are able to sit down and record an episode with us every so often. And so Robert has decided that today we're going to continue our discussion on building a cult. But before we get into it, how you doing, Robert?
I'm doing all right. I am doing all right. It's February 5th, 2025, and I'm holding together.
We are all doing just fine in these unprecedented times.
Yep.
So, in the last episode, we went through the organization and talking about all the different aspects of kind of building what the cult is before we get into who's in it and why and how it works and why and what it does and why. So that's going to be kind of what part two is covering today. But really quickly, just a reminder, I'm going to go rapid fire through this for people who need a refresher. Last time we talked about what the final goals of a cult are, as well as how it differs from a religion, and that was a pretty good conversation we had. Is a cult a part of a larger organization? Because a lot of times, cults and secret societies are within larger organizations and sometimes churches, sometimes businesses, sometimes governments. How secret is the cult itself, and how secret are the cult's methods? We talked about the factions within a cult, because it shouldn't be, and this is one thing we hit over and over again, is it shouldn't just be the one faction with the one goal. There should always be a Starscream to your Megatron, right? And then are there other cults or organizations with the same or similar goals? Are there any with contrary goals? Does your cult have direct contact with their object or deity of veneration? And then we kind of got into that a little bit, what that actually means. We spent some time talking about how powerful the cult is politically, militarily, magically, and socially. Those are all the four kinds of power that we wanted to lean into for this kind of conversation. And then how localized is the cult's influence geographically? And then we got kind of noodly for the last little bit about what is the official iconography and style of the cult. Languages, prayers, colors, symbols, themes, calling cards they may leave, wardrobe and physical characteristics they may have, tools, spells, different omens and portents. And then we finished off with what is the unofficial iconography of the cult. So that was a long ass list for last episode. We're going to try to zoom in now on the next portion, which is going to be the individuals. And I did say at the beginning of last episode that I kind of broke it out into four different categories when you think about a cult. Like, what are the questions you need to ask? The first one is the organization. That's what we did last episode. Second one is the individuals. And then, of course, there's the methods and the enemies, right? So we're going to talk about the people within the cult now. So, but really quickly, let's get a little refresher on the cult you're building specifically, which is for your homebrew domain of dread. We've done a number of episodes building it up and talking about aspects of it now, right? Mm-hmm. So if you can summarize the cult itself in about 4 sentences, how would you do it?
My cult venerates the Dread Lord of the Dark Lord of the Dread domain, with the goal of gathering enough valuables for the Horde to restore the Dark Lord's power. My Dark Lord being a fallen dragon turtle, now a mummy lord. There's no way this will work whatsoever. This is actually part of the dark powers to torment my Dark Lord. To all of this effort going nowhere, but that's their primary goal. They are open, they are known throughout the community. There's nothing secret about them, and they are feared, as they should be.
And did she have a specific tactic that she likes to use?
She does have a specific tactic. The cult has a specific tactic overall that is both a fear tactic and a reward, and it is the achieving of immortality through becoming undead. And that is either in a good way or a bad way. So the higher the cult members, the more senior you are, the more the better you are in the cult, the more you are turned into undead until you're fully undead and can achieve your immortality. Until you reach that final day when the Horde's big enough and everybody can leave, or you are forcibly turned undead to be punished. And I think we talked about two of the punishments. If you are lower ranked and you are turned undead, you are just sent off to be one of the skeleton rowers on one of her boats. The boats just have a big hold full of skeletons rowing forever. or if you are an extreme offender, your undead corpse is nailed to what is essentially the gangplank of her island as it's floating from one place to another. The island she lives on, where the fortress is her corpse as having been a dragon turtle, huge, massive one. And as it floats from one island settlement to another, it'll land, face skull first, and skull will open up. People who pay tribute or need to go onto the island will walk up the lower jaw, but they will walk through a arch made of, the upper part of her skull, her beak, and on her beak will be the nailed, wailing corpses, undead corpses of, offenders. So very ham-fisted messaging.
I also think it would be really neat to have. We've got like skeletal sharks, specifically a skeletal bloodfin and whatnot from Netherdeep. But I think it'd be neat if you've got a gangplank where people are gonna, walk the plank, down you go. Having a whole bunch of like undead sharks or zombie piranhas or something just consistently swirling underneath that would be a really fun threat, I guess.
I think I was going to go with some form of undead, immature sea serpents.
Oh, that's fun.
Her corpse was going to be sort of infested with sea serpents. I even imagine that her mummy turtle body, one of the things I will give it, will basically be like a sea serpent, writhing under her skin that she will lash out at people with. Kind of a whip typical deal.
That's so fucking crazy. I love that.
Yeah, but yeah, I was going to go with the sea serpents because I remember, one of the things I saw in my Navy days was a camel corpse floating in the Persian Gulf that just had an orgy of sea snakes bursting out of it. And I was like, yeah, that's a good image. I'm going to stick with that image.
Whether I like it or not, in the middle of the night, I will stick with that image.
Yeah. So
now you've gifted it to everyone who's listening, so thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah.
All right, let's talk about the individuals here now, into the meat of the episode. And the first question I have for anybody, and then specifically for you, is how large is the cult? Because some cults are like Hot Fuzz, where they've got 25, 30 members and that's it. Right. Some cults are one or two practicing members trying to raise the Dark Lord, right? But then there are some that have reaches like in the Cthulhu world and Lovecraftian literature. Everyone's a cultist if you dig deep enough, right?
Well, it's like the Marvel universe. Fuck, everybody's in Hydra. If
right.
You're not in Hydra, you're in the Russian one. And if you're not in the Russian one, you're like, there's no normal people here. Or John Wick.
Yeah.
There's a normal goddamn person in this universe. It's probably Steve. Steve is the one normal person. And they have meetings about how to keep him out of the loop,
Yep. So for you, how many people are in your cult? Like, how big is it?
So my cult spans my entire Dread domain. Which that's the unfortunately kind of as a limiting lens on a cult discussion because Dread domain. But I encourage everybody when listening to this, these questions are not just about the cult. It's also you got to think about how it impacts like the gameplay and the mechanics and how people act. So the size of the cult will determine whether or not your players decide to work with the cult, infiltrate the cult, or just try to kill it outright. Oh, it's 6 guys in robes. That's fine. Mine is probably in the 200, 250 people range.
What's the percentage then, would you say, of the population in your Dread domain?
I'd say probably in the 15 to 20%.
Okay. Yeah, there's not a lot of people there, hey? Like,
yeah.
You've got about 1,000 people across the entire Dread domain?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah.
And so, as I mentioned, the fortress is the floating corpse. So I was thinking of having about 100 people there to run the fortress and protect it, do the day-to-day. And then there is a fleet of ships that is being dragged by the fortress through the mists. Probably another 30 to 50 people there on the 1 or 2 boats that are enforcing order. And then throughout the settlements, another 30-ish each of the 4 settlements. with only maybe 3 or 4 senior people at each settlement, and then the rest being sort of just your NPC, almost non-combatant flock, your parishioners, your lay people.
So you're jumping us ahead a little bit, which is great, but because I wanted to say, when we think about how large the cult is, one of the main questions is how many locations does it hold? Right. How widespread geographically is it? And then we have to kind of rewind into the organization's conversation again and get into, is every location public? Are there secret altars as well as churches? Is every chapter public and working like out in the open in the daylight, or are some of them hiding in the shadows and working only after midnight or in the witching hour, right? So we have to get into locations, and locations will then tell us kind of how we group our chapters together. And then almost independently of that is how many factions are there within the cult itself, right? And this is not just the number of chapters, but if you have like a secret police that works with the cult, or the inner circle, or the dread messengers, or whatever it is that is its own faction of either higher ups or a secret society within the true cult within the cult, or that secret group of people that is trying to vie for power independently of the cult, or maybe your cult leader has, I'm not going to say a good goal or motivation or outlook, but at least a pure one. And these individuals are using it for the power, or they want to overthrow a king, or they want to use a cult for something else. So there are factions that are independent of chapters, and some chapters will be independent of the main chapter. And so you really have to think about the complexity of the politics of this cult. And the larger the cult is, the more of these you get to throw in. Have you thought about other factions inside your cult besides just the different chapters that are out there?
I have. One other thing I would touch on in the size of the cult, how large it is that to get into mechanical terms, it's also important to think about, like, when you're doing your set pieces, how many cultists, how big of an audience, like what kind of like size of a set piece do you want? And then working backwards from like the later ones, well, do I need the cultists from the earlier encounters to be alive to have that big, 40, 50 cultists chasing my guys through a giant ziggurat? Or do I have enough people spread out that they can be agnostic of the earlier encounters where maybe my people the party goes on a killing spree? But I have thought about the factions. So there are, there's 3 stratified kind of departments, if you will, factions inside of my cult. So the cult overall is called the Vigil, which was because originally they were trying to keep a Kraken asleep. So before they got turned, they had a noble, goal of keeping a Kraken asleep while helping this dragon turtle. Then they got turned, and now they're all twisted and evil. But since it was the Vigil, I stuck with that V. And so the leaders of the 3 factions are the Voice, the Vault, and the Vow. And so the Voice is the proselytizing aspect of the cult. The Vault is going to be concerned with the hoard and the treasures and receiving things. They're literally kind of the getting the gold and the tribute. And then the Vow is going to be the captain of the guard, protecting the fortress, and also running that secret police and kind of managing the fleet. And so those are my 3 sort of factions, the proselytizer, the treasurer, and the captain of the guard.
So is there a hierarchy? Like, is one more powerful than the other, or are they like a triumvirate?
They are a triumvirate. So I really have the triumvirates spread out, because underneath each of them is another 3 people, kind of 3s all over the place. But they are ostensibly equal. We're going to get a little bit into it later about the species attracted to the cult, but these are very senior undead. So the Voice and the Vow, I'm probably going to reskin the Zhang from Ravenloft.
Nice. Yeah.
Yes. Cool, good CR9 monster. I'm going to strip out some of the weakness to religious iconography and reflection stuff, but great kind of obscure monster. And then the Vault, I decided to go with a Oni in disguise as an undead.
All right.
And then I was going to put a couple more Oni throughout the cult. And really, that's the other kind of internal faction, the Oni faction in the cult, and that's where you're going to have your star screams trying to overtake the top Oni, because they're not going to be able to take they're not going to be able to displace Bishi, the Dread Lord herself. She's too powerful as a jacked up mummy lord. But Oni traditionally are very covetous of magical items. So, the vault is in charge of the magical hoard of a dragon. That's the position all the Oni want. So there might be some chance for backstabbery there.
That brings me to actually one of the questions I wanted to ask, because in Dungeons and Dragons, cults are often based around some sort of magic items that they either have or they need to get. They wield a specific kind of dark magic, a specific kind of dark weapon, or they're looking, like in the Rise of Tiamat, they're after the 5 chromatic dragon masks, right?
Right.
So what are the magic items that you're looking for? Because I know that you're out there looking for tribute, but is there a series of magic items you're looking for, or magic items that the cult already controls that are like massive icons of the cult that everybody knows? Or are they, everyone who runs one of the 3 factions has a bracelet that can do whatever, has time stop, that kind of stuff. Like,
so kind of all over the place on that. It is not known to the public at large, but the biggest items that Bishi is actually looking for are these. So when she became a Dread Lord, the big final act that she committed that was, the grave sin, was she tried to become sort of a version of a Dracolich to live forever, to keep fighting this, or to hold back this Kraken. There's not really anything about dragon turtles being able to do that. And so I'm going to make up some vaguely Egyptian concept, because I like to fold in, I'm trying to fold in ancient Egypt and kind of a little bit of ancient China in this. Where she sacrifices her children in an attempt to become immortal. And so what she is actually looking for, and what the party are going to be looking for, are the ossified, the hearts of her children that are spread throughout this land that she actually can't get to physically, but they can, because if she can collect them and put them into the corpse of her eldest child, she plans to try and transfer, through some great ritual, transfer her essence into that corpse to once again be a dragon turtle.
Yeah, we've spoken about this a number of times. That's kind of like the big plot hook, like the main method, right? Is basing your cult around kind of these items. That's the final goal, right?
Right. That's the big one. Now you're talking about the more, not to say mundane, because talking magical items, but like the day-to-day that people might see. We'll get into the altar later. We talked about the altar a little bit last time, but that's going to play a big part. And then because it is a seafaring campaign, I'm going to be focusing a lot on various ocean-going tools. So there's a thing called a marlin spike, which is just a big fucking metal spike, about 6 inches long, that is used for splicing and splining together line and rope. It's a tool used by most bosun mates to do that. But it is you do not see it off a ship. That is where they live. And so I thought, okay, that's a good one to use. And I was really thinking about this question about magic items, because, the magic items need to be useful in sort of a day-to-day. We always think of, what's the cult magic item? Well, it's the curvy serpent dagger that's a +1 that also poisons. It's like, that's great to scare people, but if you're trying to give out magic items that encourage them to be part of your community, your cult, they don't want to use that curvy dagger every day. So I was thinking a marlin spike that maybe could cast the mending cantrip, and at the higher levels would be used as both part of that transmogrification into undead. We talked about that last time, of like, okay, you're going to have parts sewn into you. All right, well, I got this big needle here, and it's going to be part of that. Maybe it can be used for cure wounds, or maybe it can be used for inflict wounds, things like that. And then I was, thinking another big thing would be some form of transportation between the islands. That would be a extreme, benefit to being in the cult. That would be a lot of power. So I know that a teleportation circle is not exactly a magic item, but the cult would have access at their shrines to teleportation circles to travel to other settlements. And now that we've talked about that, we can go into the interesting stuff, the weapons. So I was thinking, kind of your classic cat o' nine tails, but with fish hooks along it and for heads.
I'm trying to remember now where I've seen that before, because that's not the first time I've heard that. And I'm like, what is the absolute horror show? It must have been like a Stephen King novel or something. One of the later Hellraiser movies, maybe. Like I
Might have been Hellraiser, yeah.
like I have heard of that before, and it makes my skin crawl.
Yeah. I would probably also take a run at making nets better, fishing nets, and then,
Yeah.
some sort of magical harpoon or a magical khopesh, that big curved sword that the Egyptians carried. That
Yeah.
would the khopesh would be that would be a symbol of office. That would be the senior most person at the settlement would carry that, and in the cult, there'll be a badge of office. So that's kind of where I was going with those.
So, just thinking about magic items really quickly, how do the leaders of the chapters, so not leaders of the factions, but the chapters, so when you're spread around, do they get advanced warning that Bishi and the island are showing up? And if so, how do they know? What magic item lets them know?
So that was going to be through that altar we were talking about last time. So the altar is going to be a ship's bell turned upside down and filled with seawater, always filled with seawater, and the ship's bell is going to be made from the scales of the dragon turtle. Yeah. And that altar was going to be used both as an altar, a place to do things, but also as a communication device. And I was thinking even that might be the low-level teleportation circle. When somebody gives up tribute, they place it into the water in the bell, and then it sinks and disappears and reappears on the fortress.
Is there any way for a chapter leader or even a faction leader to summon her, to bring the hurt? I'm just thinking, you're at the end of tier 2, and this is what, if I was running a cult, you're at the end of tier 2, you're heading towards the later half of the campaign now, so you're going up to level 20, but like you're in the thick of it, you're not newbies anymore, and right. You've busted up a couple of chapters, but now you've taken on your first like real big significant group of cultists at this point. And the last thing that happens is this leader of this faction or chapter is able to then, normally it would be like open a portal and summon the devil they've been worshiping, or right. or look into the mummified dragon eye and tell Tiamat, these people are here, you need to watch out now, right? Like what's their big threat for you in your campaign? Like, are they able to bring her along, or to at least report shit up the chain of command?
Yeah. So yes, the leaders at the different chapters can report back, up the chain of command, and then the faction leaders, the voice, the vault, and the vow on her fortress can summon her. They can get her attention to come and do things. She is not going to go on to settlements.
No,
she's paranoid about leaving her fortress.
No, but you would see the fortress show up through the fog, right?
Yes,
and then the horde of cultists comes ashore, right?
And I plan on having some just mum-ra fuck off type, her standing on top of her ziggurat with a focusing lens, firing off like a level 40 disintegration and just like wiping out 3 buildings type thing. Like, as long as she's up there, she can direct immense power just to convince people, hey, don't fight her head on.
I love that quite a bit. If you've got a mummy lord, you should also be handing out plagues.
Yeah. Yes.
So that'd be something cool. Like, one of the omens that she's approaching is just all of these turtles that have been buried in the mud and the muck around suddenly wriggle up to the surface and head out towards sea, and you didn't even know they were there. It's just suddenly the town with the dirt roads are just crawling in little baby turtles, and every once in a while a larger turtle, as they get summoned over towards her. Just like the weird omens and plagues of turtles and shit would be a lot of fun. I know the answer to this already, so I'm not really asking you, but I do feel like we need to address this. When you're looking at a cult structure hierarchy, you need to know who the leader is. You clearly already know. You need to know who's the next in line. Yours doesn't have a next in line because we're dealing with the domain of dread, right? So,
right.
But for a lot of them, a lot of cults, there is someone next in line. So we're not talking about the person or the entity, the Tiamat or Asmodeus or whoever that's being prayed to. We're talking about the person doing the praying, the head
Right.
priest, right? The head cultist should have, there should be a hierarchy of people ready to replace them if anything ever happens to them, right?
Yes.
And why do these people not seize control? We know why for you, for Bishi, but we don't know for the Onis, right? Why aren't they making a move right now in this moment? What are they waiting for, and what triggers do they need before they can do that? And these could be things that have them approaching the party to say, hey, can you do this? Can you do this little side quest? You can undermine the leader of the vault. And then they do that, and then the other guy just steps right in, right? Like,
right.
Thank you for removing my rival. And these are things when we're building cults that we should be thinking about, and not just for storyline purposes, but also because these fucking players will just crit 3 times in a row and kill your main head cultist, and you need to have someone there to step in, right? So that means that I tend to start. You said that everything's in groups of 3s, which makes me think of a pyramid scheme, right?
Yeah.
I often do that when I do my like ranks and hierarchy. Is I will come up with a certain number of ranks before I stop caring anymore, right? Like I've got maybe 3 or 4, like all the entry level ones will just be entry level, and I just call them the gray robes. There may be little bits and pieces of who's in charge based on what silver belt that they've got, but it's the gray robes, right? And then after that is the green robes, and above that is the black robes, and the top one is a red robe, right? So how many ranks are there, and then what are the responsibilities of these ranks? And because every cult member has a purpose, we want them because we need them to do something. That is why we're consistently getting cult members. And sometimes it's just money. We just want their money, right? We just want their standing. We want the mayor to just turn the other cheek, right? And so we want the mayor in our pocket, right? So sometimes that's all it is. But when we're dealing with the different ranks, the hierarchy and whatnot, you have to think about what are these active cult members accomplishing? What are they bringing to the table?
So 2 things on that. One, when talking about who's going to replace the cult leader and or vying to be in that spot, you're probably not going to have a clearly defined succession plan, because the cult leader will see that as an inherent threat to themselves. So they're going to have 2, 3, 4 people beneath them, and they are going to be pitting those people against each other to see who's vying for it more, who can do more for the cult leader, who can prove themselves. But also they're going to be fomenting that distrust and dislike between those, immediate lieutenants, to stop them from ganging up on or saying, we don't need one cult leader, we can lead this with a council. So that can play into, a lot of the internal politics. Is how is your cult leader ensuring their own survival against their lieutenants?
I agree with you for the most part, but every once in a while you'll come up with a cult that they're just zealots.
Right.
And that'll be a little different, right?
The tough thing with the cults that are just zealots is, in my mind, when they're just zealots, they're going to be so crazy that they are very short-lived.
Yeah.
They don't have a 50-year plan. They've got a 5-week plan that ends with some catastrophic thing that they think will ignite something, not necessarily one that they plan to see through to the end and then be in control of.
That's when you have like everyone's a zealot, and even the cult leader's a zealot, but then, his second in command and a handful of other people, they're that secret faction inside, driving the force and leading it all through whispers and influence and seeing specifically crafted omens that they've decided to see right. And so that's how you control the zealot factor here. But for the most part, I think you're right. Like, there has to be a certain amount of scheming, unless you're dealing with a Tiamat. Bishi is another good one, a Demogorgon. You're not going to replace this.
Right.
Right. So, and these are the people that are being venerated. They're the people that are being worshipped. Right. So,
And
sorry, go ahead.
yes, and the other thing I wanted to get out was what I think is very important when talking about the ranks of the cult. You mentioned roles and responsibilities, and I 100% agree with that. And that can be a little hard to define. You know, you're not putting together a position description, and it'll differ from chapter to chapter as to what you're doing. But something that, in real world, when you're talking about cults and, hey, listeners, please use everything we're talking about to go and start your own multi-level marketing scheme, common cult. But you got to think about what level of indoctrination, secrets, knowledge do each of those levels of cultist have. I think we talked about that last time because, the Manson family apparently had over 100 people in it. And you know for a fact that when they went up to every single one of those people, they did not open with, do you want to join our commune? We're going to kill Sharon Tate, and then we're going to start a race war. The day-to-day people did not fucking know that.
No.
And so the day-to-day, your lower level people are going to have your least amount of information. And then your middle managers are going to have more information, and they're probably going to be in it for the power. And then your top level is going to be in it for the money /power/zealotry. But creating that stratified of these guys know, these guys don't know, these guys have the real secrets. Very important in a cult structure.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with all of that. That's why I even have a note in the breakdown here. Like when you come to the responsibilities and the descriptions of the ranks and whatnot, be vague. Allow yourself room to wiggle, right? So that your lower level can just be. I would have something as simple as they're worshipers that show up to mass. They are moderately well equipped and able to fight. And they are a cowardly lot. I don't need to go any deeper than that, right? Or they are desperate people. The level above that can be something like these are the real zealots. They lead prayers, and they have access to a +1 magic item. Like I don't need much more than that until I get into it and I see in the moment how my campaign is starting to flourish and what direction my players are heading. And then I can start to get into, oh, okay, I need this guy in the bright silver robe to do this thing. So, okay, now that's a part of this. Is it going to throw off my structure? No, great. Okay, that's a part of everyone of the silver robe can do this shit now, right? Like, and you got to be flexible with it because your organization has to be flexible, and that allows you to quote unquote like unveil the next step when you're really just kind of going, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense, next. Or I guess I got to bring in a guy in a gold robe, right? Like so let's actually talk about some of the people that are in it now. We've been talking about kind of the structure within the structure, the places, the slots that the people fit. But the very first thing that I think about when I'm thinking about what kind of person does the cult want as a member is the kind of species that are either attracted to the cult or that the cult seeks out. For example, the cult of the dragon seeks out dragonborn and half dragons, right? Kobolds will flock to them, right? But they're not necessarily seeking out kobolds.
Right.
So do you have an answer for your cult, or is it a little bit more open? You've got a multicultural realm.
It is a multicultural realm, and that, the dread domain aspect limits it. But I would say the people who are attracted to the species that are attracted to the cult, I don't know the exact species, but I can give kind of a shape of it, are going to be, ones that have they want a communal lifestyle. They don't want to be on their own.
Mm-hmm.
And also artisans, because, I've spoken the horde, the magical horde of our items is the goal of the cult. Where do those come from? You need people to make them. And so hey,
you're probably looking at gnomes and dwarves that are making up a
gnomes and dwarves.
Okay.
Things like that. And then the species the cult is, seeking out, in addition to that, are ones who are aquatic in nature.
Yes.
Ones that can survive better in the water, to better support the fleet, to better support the actual island, and to kind of keep that power projection going.
I would also say ones that are naturally intimidating. Orcs, Goliaths, even ogres, right?
Yeah.
Bugbears. These would be the species I'd be looking at, just because having a couple of giant ogre bouncers just at the front door, just guards,
Yeah.
is enough to send a message, right? So, and that's one thing.
Yeah, and I was thinking,
Sorry,
go ahead.
go nuts.
One of the ships I have is going to be hobgoblins, and so I was thinking they probably are, they're probably on board with the cult idea, stratified, militaristic. They've got a place in it. But yeah,
I really look at the idea that a cult, any public facing side of the cult, has to be, it has to project power, and it's going to project an image. It's going to send a message, right? And it's going to either be an intimidation factor, fuck off, let us do our own thing, or a friendly welcoming gesture, come in, let's check your thetan levels, right? Like, it's one or the other.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Sometimes it can be both, right? Depends on the strength of their legal team. But once we figure out what species to talk about, we're moving right along and not naming names. The next thing. So the next thing is the social statuses and levels of wealth that are not just attracted to the cult, but again, that the cult seeks out, right? Because it's not enough to say, hey, we want the rich guys. The rich guys got to think they're going to get richer. There's got to be in it for them too, right? Otherwise, they're a puppet. Right. They're not a cult member.
So the cult does want the richer people. Again, it's all about the horde. Honestly, the cult probably venerates the horde more than it actually venerates species, right?
Yeah.
And so they want your rich people. Now, the difficulty is dread domain. Who's actually rich? How do you define wealth when everybody's just surviving? And so the cult is probably actually going to seek out the individuals who may show up as the richest people in the realm by virtue of their gear. They might seek out adventurers. They want to find the adventurers that show up and say, hey, do you have you've got that +1 magic item. You've got that, whatever. We want you in the cult, you're giving that to us. And then I think that it is going to be your lower social statuses that seek the cult out actively. And again, I'm going back to this idea of the cult being able to distribute low-level magic items that just have a huge quality of life improvement. If you are living in a dread domain and somebody gives you a magical spike that has 5 charges a day and can cast either mending or prestidigitation. Okay, I can now fix my stuff without wasting resources, and I can make my food not taste like fish gruel. Yeah, that sounds great. I'm living the high life now.
You're touching again on one of the other questions that we have here, which is the level of vulnerability of the people, like the marginalized people or the less fortunate, the impoverished. Are they going to come in and look for a home? Are they and does the cult think they're worth it? Right. Do we need to swell the numbers, or are they going to drag us down? Right. What kind of ritual do we need to put them through to make it so that they're not going to go wild? They're not going to go crazy, because we want the people that are scared and starving to come join us, and we'll feed them and we'll give them safety, and they will follow us forever. But crazy Jed, who keeps talking to his dead wife and is a chronic masturbator, we don't need him. He may be just on the verge of poverty as well, but we don't want that guy. Right. So what's the difference? Right. So so that's going to lean into as well what level of intelligence and education, what skill sets are they looking for, or will be attracted to them as well. Because if you are an artisan, this is a free lunch, right, every day. So in a dread domain, for example, that does not have like a teeming economy ready to support your artistry.
So what levels of intelligence are attracted to the cult? I mean, the nice thing about having a cult that has, 3 or 4 different, if you will, job paths is you can create a place for everybody. I need that person who does not get bored and does not mind standing here at this door for 8 hours a day looking scary. I also need somebody who can very accurately keep tally of a dragon's horde and do trend analysis as to who's giving more or what or blah, 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 blah. I need somebody who's very charismatic to spread the word. So, you can create a place for everybody, which, when you're talking about species and social status and vulnerability and skill sets, if you want to make it easy on your players, you limit that. What's the species? Gnolls, and it's only gnolls in this cult, and it's gnoll level intelligence, and it's gnoll level skill set, and they always wear red with the word cult written in gnoll on it. And you do that for your players, or you say, I'm going to make a cult that will welcome everybody, and anybody can be involved in it at different levels. And that's where you get into that insidious level of, well, anybody I talk to could be this cult member. And so I'm thinking, if in a multicultural society, all levels are going to be attracted to the cult. I don't think the cult is necessarily actively seeking any out unless they are looking to, replace an individual that maybe they lost somewhere along the way. And when you're talking about,
so I feel like they're grooming the next person, like to not necessarily the next person to step up in line, but like we'll never go without if something happens, right?
Yes. And but to get it back into the horror thing, we are talking about a group of people who are promising immortality and delivering on it through becoming undead. So while they are grooming somebody, there's always a chance that they're not actually grooming Steve and the chronic masturbator. They're simply changing him enough that when they need to replace one of their own parts, I've got my walking organ bank right here to do it with.
Is that what we're calling it now? Your organ bank?
I'm going to refer to my friend Steve at work as the organ bank. Yeah. He doesn't listen to the show, so he doesn't know I'm outing him as a chronic masturbator who talks to his dead wife. But yeah.
Apologies to anyone named Steve who actually does have a wife who's passed and sex addiction. We didn't mean to call you out directly, but we have now. So
yeah, no, I'm sorry. I will take your organs. Stay away from me. But I am sorry for calling you out. But spoiler, I'll take your organs.
The last thing to bring up when we look at the kind of individuals that a cult wants as a member should be the non-humanoids. And we touched on this. We mentioned ogres and oni and whatnot, but we should really think about, like, at what point do you get a beholder on board with you? At what point are you going to say, you know what, my cult would really appeal to Myconids, or we really want them involved here? At what point are we sitting there going, yeah, you know what, it's time to call the Yugoloths. We need extra muscle, right? Let's see if we can pay them off. So, like, which non-humanoid, which beasts, what creatures, which monsters are they going to lean on? Are they going to have manticores because manticores can speak? Are they going to have Grell, right? Like, what are the weird things that are going to be there? And we can look at kind of, this should almost change chapter by chapter based on location and geography, like what's going to fit nicely in here. But sometimes you can dig into like a faction as well within the cult, like you did with the Oni, right? And the Vault. So it's something to keep in mind. Do you have any like big non-humanoid, like besides the Oni, like, do you have a evil storm giant in the back pocket of your Dreadlord?
You're giving me ideas. I hadn't really thought too much about it. I'm kicking myself because I'm forgetting the creature's name and I can't find it in the monster manual. Morkoth?
Oh, the Morkoth. Yeah. Yes. Absolutely leans in.
An extremely reduced Morkoth, because if I remember right, they are also obsessed with treasure.
They are, and what you could have is a Morkoth. Like if the horde is within her shell, like within the husk in her body, the Morkoth could live in the stomach and be like consistently organizing and reorganizing the treasure.
Right.
And you have a handful of, I don't know, Darrow or something that are working with the Morkoth to like write down frantically whatever the Morkoth is doing. Every once in a while the Morkoth gets pissed off or tripping over one of them and eats them. Right. Like you could have a really cool, interesting, like the people that run the vault, but they don't go in the vault. That's right. Oni. When you go in the vault, Morkoth, now you're fucked.
Right. And that's the, I think I'd knock the CR down on it because that thing is pretty strong if I remember right.
Yes. Yeah.
But yeah, and I mean there's another answer on, well, why hasn't the Oni one step down replaced the top Oni? He doesn't get along with the Morkoth. Like that's a fucking dangerous thing to have a problem with.
Yeah, that Morkoth is paranoid as shit.
Right.
So
But treasures keep coming in, so it's kind of, it's in the best spot it can be in the dread domain.
So we touched briefly on it a couple moments ago about what the cult offers new members, whether it's opportunities for people that are particularly vulnerable or to help the rich get richer. But when we're talking about the opportunities that attract people to the cult, we should also start thinking about the opportunities within the cult to move up. And that's one of the things where the ranking system, I don't know a whole lot about this, and I certainly don't remember the name of it, but I do remember reading a very long story. It was an article a few years ago. It was based on one of these like children's schools. Well, it was kind of and they're littered across North America. These hyper religious children's schools that are just nothing but fear, intimidation, and abuse. But the parents don't know this. They just send their quote unquote troubled teens off and then see them for supervised visits once a year, right? As these,
Right.
But the teens come in sometimes as children and are victimized, and then like the only way to stop the victimization is to take the opportunity when it arises to victimize another person lower than you, right? And it's this
Right.
vicious, horrendous cycle of the people in power are the cruelest and the ones that are the most creative with it because they've needed to in order to survive this, right?
Yeah.
And so there is a structure of if you do this, you can become this. You get rewards for doing these things within our organization here. And I mean, if you look at any business model, just promotions and raises are enough for a lot of people, right? But when you get into the zealot perspective, when you get into people who are desperate or people that have been raised within the cult and know nothing different, then this becomes the carrot and the stick becomes a lot more viable, and you can come up with really unique options, especially in the Dungeons and Dragons world, where it can be something as simple as, hey, we control the undead. Would you like to speak to your long dead mother? And you can do that if you get to this level. We have speak with undead. And maybe it is just like a major illusion, but the cult members don't know that, right?
Yeah. No, you got to it as I was going to get to it. So, when you're talking about things that a cult can offer new members, I think it should not start off as something extremely tangible for the newest people, the most vulnerable, the ones coming in.
Yeah.
You're talking about experiences, the experience of feeling welcomed, the experience of being respected and treated as a human being that may, or an individual that maybe you haven't gotten elsewhere. A lot of people are not treated with respect for a lot of their lives. And so even the semblance of that is a very attractive thing to them. And it might just be a full belly and a warm place to be. And so I thought about, if you're in a dread domain, one of the worst things about being there is the monotony. Every day is going to be the same, and it's going to be grayed out and washed out and shitty and, terrible. And so they can offer experiences. And so I was thinking that, the further on we, talk about kind of like what the shrines look like and what their places of worship look like. And I was pondering that, and I thought it would be very interesting, since this is a seagoing world, if the shrine itself almost looked like a large ark on the land, like Noah's Ark, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And when people came in, there would be the illusion of, you are on the deck of the ship and it's going to take you through like a day-night cycle, but now there's no mist. There's the beautiful ocean, and we get to see the sunrise, and we get to see it, travel through the air, and it's warm, and it's, a nice, beautiful day. And then it goes down, and we get to see the stars at night as the priest or whoever is taking you through the different lessons and the different sermons they're doing. And so as people move up, maybe they get to see more of that. The lay people at the bottom just get to experience that wonderful idyllic day at sea, rapid fire, in an hour and a half, if you will. But then the deacons of the chapters, they get to experience that boat going somewhere else and going to somewhere that's not in the dread domain. And so they almost get a false tour of something. And so you're offering that kind of experience in addition to the camaraderie of being with other like-minded people. And so, that's a very easy thing to do before getting into the higher level. Okay, now you have this magic item, you have this magic marlin spike. Now we're replacing one of your organs or one of your limbs with an undead one, and you get some additional benefits from that. You feel a little better, you're a little stronger, you have some magical abilities that you can do now. But at that low level, that pull them in is that just a nice experience that they're not going to get anywhere else.
Okay, so you've inspired me a little bit. And again, take this or leave this.
Yeah.
Because it's a bit extreme. I'm not sure if it fits your model that you've got set up for your cult. But you're in a dread domain, and you're in a dread domain, and it sucks. And you're worried about the people left behind that didn't get into the dread domain with you. If you join the cult, we can see and we can give you updates on how they're doing. And you can trust us because we will always tell the truth. We will step into this circle and it glows, and that means you cannot tell a lie in the circle. And we will tell you exactly what we see. And there are people with, like, I don't know, some sort of magical orb or something that's implanted in their eye, and it's like one of the first steps of becoming undead is having like maybe a shriveled up petrified eyeball that you keep an eye patch over, and only the higher ups get it, but they can quote unquote scry to other domains. Are they telling the truth? We don't know, but they say they are. And if you get high enough, you get your own eye and you can check in on the people. And then when you get even higher than that, you can then smell what they smell, taste what they taste, feel the humidity and the warmth for brief periods of time. All we need to do, if you want to feel this on your face, we just need to give you a skin graft. Let us peel your face off.
Yes. Well, you're getting ahead of it because I had something about that, but a lot of faces getting ripped off in my campaign, but
that's what happens. When you're talking cults, you're talking face.
You're talking cults, you're talking face. But yeah, exactly. Hey, you join this and everybody knows our cult is the only way we're getting out of here. All we got to do, we can get, if we can get that ticker up on our fundraiser thermometer, then, the horde is full, Bishi is restored, the dread domain goes away. And so if you join us, when you are high up enough, you get to see the promised land we're going to. We're going to show it to you. You are going to actually experience it a little bit at a time. Hell, pick out where on the beach you want to put your house. Now, we don't know when we're going to get to that point, so you need to become undead to get there. And you don't want to be left behind in the dread domain. So yeah, carrot stick, neat little package.
This also answers my next question that I had, which is, how does the cult keep its members? It's not enough to bring them in. You then have to keep them. And a lot of time, this is where the fear starts to come in. Cultists should know that it is a bad fucking idea to break the rules. And everything will be fine. If you never break the rules, you will be absolutely fine. But if you break those rules,
so yes, and so you've got the how do they keep cult members and what happens to ex-members, and the answer for this is kind of the same. So I was thinking that we were talking about rites, rituals they go through, things like that, but ex-members are most likely going to be, okay, you've committed some sort of sin in the eyes of the cult, and so you are going to be relegated to either that the rowing team or nailed to Bishi's skull for all eternity. But we're going to rip your face off, and we are going to, the lead preacher for each of the settlements, each of the chapters, is going to have, either a giant case full of these mummified faces they're keeping, or I was thinking almost like having them worn inside of a cloak. And then, they're going to put that face on during the sermon. And in that person's voice and in that person's mannerisms, they're going to speak remorsefully and lament all of their transgressions and how they made a mistake. And so they are going to speak for the dead in that case of, like, we all know what happened to Bill. He took from the communal coffers. Well, Bill's been punished, and Bill is here to apologize to all of you for betraying your trust. let's welcome Bill, and then puts on the face and speaks as Bill. And I was thinking, even as people move up in the cult itself, when they move from a deacon to ordained or whatever, they will have to go through that themselves. They'll have to stand there. They'll have to pick out a face, kind of like picking out, oh, your favorite quote from the Bible. You're going to pick that and speak from it. No, you're going to pick the face that you want to wear and speak that person's transgression, speak their experiences, speak their sorrow, and you are also going to feel that as the wearer of the face. So,
my God, you should have some sort of absolutely like nearly a decrepit, wizened old man who is just like bent over, hunchbacked, like Jafar when he was pretending to be the old prisoner.
yeah, yes,
Right? Like one of these guys who carries the sack around and always hears the lamentations of the faces in his mind, but he's the keeper of the face or something, and you don't know what that means. If you want to go speak to undead or whatever, you have to go talk to the keeper of the face.
yeah.
And you meet this guy, and he's just like, he hasn't slept in years.
Right. You got to go speak to whispers of the dead.
Yeah.
I don't want to speak to whispers. But I don't want to speak to whispers. When I'm near whispers, I can hear it in my head. Like, I don't want to speak to whispers.
Yeah, and that guy, he's even when he smiles at you, he's crying at the same time, and he's trying to like, this has got to be the most tormented person ever. And maybe like he was one of Bishi's priests that promised her, or that told her in the first place that, hey, this ritual to make you become a Draculich is going to work. And now she torments him. He fucked up. This is a fate worse than death, right? Also, it occurs to me with all of this that I really want you at some point to find some way to make it so that you want to be a friend of the cult, but you don't want to be a chum. And every once in a while, they'll be like, hey, chum, come over here. And that's scary, because that literally means they're going to feed you to fish. You are going to be chum. So there's got to be a way to play with that prank or that pun a little bit.
Yes.
Somewhere in your campaign. That just kind of hit me.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes. Now I'm thinking that, chum. Perfect. I'm writing that down. But I'm also thinking, like, when you're talking about ex-members, I'm thinking at the very, very lowest levels, they just don't give a shit. The people that came 3 times and didn't do it, they just really didn't take hold. Do they really care about them as ex-members? Are they even members? They got to get through some sort of initiation first.
I was going to say they have to pass a rite.
Yeah.
So, but then once they do, they're in, right? Like, this is the commitment. So,
yeah. And I think, we mentioned previously, I thought something to kind of define each, what is something that each member has that you can see on them. And we were talking about like, a necklace that's like almost a small plate of bone on the inside of which is scrimshawed something, and so they keep that covered unless they're around only other cultists, and then they turn it over. And the level they are, or their exploits, what they've done, is detailed almost like a coat of arms, a heraldry on that bone plate in scrimshaw. And again, that goes back to your scrying. We've given you this, we've gone through a rite, we're listening to you through this bone. But that could also be something that poor Whispers has to carry. He's been not only under this cloak of faces he's wearing, he's also wearing all of the necklace plates. So he walks around, clattering all the time. He's basically an old version of Harrison Bergeron. And if you haven't read Harrison Bergeron by Kurt Vonnegut, everybody should go read that one. That one's a good one. That one's terrifying.
I'm putting it on my list.
It's like 8 pages long. So some people are worried about A Brave New World. Some people are worried about 1984. Harrison Bergeron's up there.
All right, I'm gonna check it out.
Yeah.
So I have one final question before we wrap this episode up.
Okay.
Because it looks like we're going to be a 3-parter at this point. And
good in depth for the cult. Yeah.
Yeah. Who truly benefits the most and how? But I want to expand that. Who benefits and how do they benefit? Because there has to be benefits at every level.
Well, I mean, when you think about it again in the context of a dread domain, it's actually not that bad to be in this cult.
Yeah.
You know, you get experiences you're not going to get otherwise. It's a form of religious worship that has a lot of the benefits of religious worship, without also pissing off the known cult in the area. And it has a it has a chance at immortality through being undead if that's your thing. And if you're a craftsman, it's the only way to have an actual workspace and materials and things like that. So in a lot of ways, a lot of people actually do benefit from being in the cult. The major cons for it would be maybe you don't want to be an undead, or maybe it goes against your species' actual religion, or there's a level of ostracism in your particular settlement that goes with it. Or maybe you're poor old fucking whispers carrying around the bag of faces. But I would say that kind of the lieutenants under Bishi, they've got a very comfortable undeath in their existence. The people immediately beneath them also have a very comfortable existence in this dread domain. And then probably most of the middle managers are really benefiting. So now that I think about it, the most benefited is probably the Morkoth. I mean, he's just getting a steady stream of valuables delivered to him to obsess over.
Which, I mean, is what I do with my D&D books and my minis. So, yes, that feels good.
Yeah.
I think that's where we're going to wrap it for today. We're going to leave it so that we can talk about, we talked about, from the cult's point of view, who are the good guys. Next time, we're going to talk about who are the bad guys and also what methods that they're going to use, in and among their own people, but also in the world and against their enemies and whatnot as well in the next episode. So, my last thought before I wrap this up is there's got to be some way for you to, I was sitting here racking my brain thinking about puns and whatnot. The word worship is so close to the words warship. There's got to be something in there for you to play with for a puzzle or a riddle. There's got to be some warning to, when they first show up, to beware the dragon turtle worship, and then it actually is beware the dragon turtle warship, right? Something.
I can work with that, because the initial thing in my campaign is going to be a House of Lament, Death House style cursed haunted lighthouse, and so the ghosts can say that beware the turtle worship, and it can be, or the dragon turtle worship, that can be there. Another pun along that is, I mentioned that the shrines are going to be like arcs. They're going to be these styled after a big boat, but also all of the sermons inside are going to be, this is the cleaned up lie version of how Bishi saved everybody from some sort of cataclysm, and that's why we're in this dread domain. And now she just needs our help to get us back to the good world. And so it's going to be the literal, the arc of that story, beginning to end, is going to be the sermon of, there was going to be an apocalypse, Bishi saved us, we're here now. So the arc is going to contain arcs.
I enjoy that as well. I think that you could get a lot of puns out of this if you wanted to, just to create riddles or at least parallels and make your players stop and go, oh shit, that was clever.
And we've said it before, you've got to inject a little bit of levity or a shit ton of levity into dread domains, because nobody wants to just play sadness and grueling for 50 sessions.
And that kind of brings me to the I can't remember which episode it was we were talking about it on, your giant snails races, the iron snails
settlement. Yeah,
that's right. That was the episode. I have been thinking about that semi-frequently. The amount of shit that I see online over the last about 4 months that has been snail related has been insane. Yeah. I don't know how I ended up on this side of the algorithm, but I every time I see something snail-like, I'm like, oh, that'd be neat. Oh, that's cool. Oh, that'd be a good thing for the settlement. Fuck, snails are weird.
Snails are weird. Snails are fascinating. I was going to put a specialized breed of snails inside of Bishi. So that's where all the currency is actually going to come from. Is there's going to be one snail that produces gold flakes, one that produces copper, one that produces silver, based on what they're fed. And so, I'm adding a mint, if you will, inside of Bishi to, if you're going to control everything, you may as well control the actual currency of the realm.
Are you just going to reskin flail snails?
Something. I haven't figured out how I'm going to do it yet. I might just build. I feel like it deserves to be built from the ground up. So I might actually have to create it from the ground up, a whole new snail, a whole new snail.
The weird paths we go down when we're building campaigns.
Yes. Yeah.
Anyway, do you have any final thoughts about the individuals that you would put in a cult?
Yeah, I mean, cults are fascinating. Cults are a great way to not have to explain why people are doing things. I had this conversation at work the other day. We were talking about the Jonestown cult, and someone said, "Oh, do you know why they did that?" And the response was, "It was a cult." It's like that's the answer. But go a little bit deeper. You got to go a little bit deeper. Get into that concept of how is it stratified? What are the different levels? What secrets do the different levels know? Because the people going into a cult, as mentioned, they're vulnerable. They're not necessarily insane. They don't have the end game in mind. And it can provide a lot of flavor. It can inject a lot of moral choices for your players as to how they deal with the different levels of the cult. Because if every single cultist they come across is speaking with a sibilant hiss and has a curved snake dagger and a hood and slit eyes, they're all the exact same cultist, and they're all going to get killed, and that's it.
Yeah.
And it gets one-dimensional. Give them dimensions, make it interesting, because that's how you lure a player into the cult. And as you mentioned before, that's where it gets really fun.
Absolutely. Speaking of luring people into things, do you have any people, personal social media or projects or anything you'd like to shout out or mention?
Sort of. So it's really trying times out there for everybody. It's really trying times for the world. Small, big actions are having huge ripple effects everywhere. And by the same token, small actions to some people can have huge impacts on others. A few years ago, a friend of mine asked me what I wanted for Christmas. And I said I didn't want anything, leave me alone. And I told them, just donate to a school. And they told me a couple of weeks ago that because of their, not inconsiderate, but also not bank breaking donations to schools in Bangladesh and schools in the Philippines, that her support alone has kept those schools open, period.
Wow.
And so the action, one person's generosity, or a small number of people's generosity, can impact the lives of 30, 40, 50, hundreds of, people in need. So I would say, look for those kind of opportunities. The one in the Philippines is called Keoni Kid Zone, Keoni Kid Zone. They can be found through various social medias. There is a Christian one called Asha Partners, and then there's a few others, but there's a lot out there. And I would say if you can do, because you can make a huge change in people's lives. And, these are the days to do that.
Absolutely. And people will be able to check our show notes to be able to see the spelling of these, and I'll try to get links in there as well.
Yeah, I'll hook you up with those. Yeah,
perfect. So that's all for this discussion on building a cult, part 2 of 3, apparently. Thank you, Robert, for choosing this topic, for workshopping your homebrew, and for supporting the Patreon. And thank you, the listener, for listening to another episode of the It's a Mimic podcast. All Platinum Great Worm tier patrons have access to all our Patreon content, the It's a Mimic Discord, and the opportunity to choose and record episodes with topics they'd like, just like this episode. If you'd like to learn more, the link to our Patreon is in the show notes of this episode. If you'd like to support us in other ways, we have a donate button on our website, itsamimic.com, a store with some It's a Mimic merch. But if you would like to support us, support these guys instead for at least a little while, because that's more important than a D&D podcast. This episode and others can also be found on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and most other podcast apps. Thanks again for listening to It's a Mimic, where you never know what you're going to get.